Okay, here we are. So before we begin, what we're going to do today is we're going to review your assignment for the upcoming week. That'll be due this Sunday, and then we're going to go over the homework assignment from last week, and we're actually going to do those in class, so you have an example of what is going on there. Before we start, are there any questions about the homework assignment? Did you struggle with anything?
The margins were difficult to work with for me.
Struggling with the margins? Just the margins on getting on which one, on the sonnet or on the circles? On the circles, just doing the margin to space those out, yeah. Okay.
When doing the sonnet, I had a problem with lining up the boxes. The left box was down at the bottom because it was parented to the top div, I think it was.
Right.
That you said?
To the outer div. It's parent container, right? So
yeah,
so when you
too, with
the
left side not being one piece.
Yeah, so when you put containers next to each other, so the default styling is for them to be in a block designation, which means they show up one right after the other on top of each other. If you use the inline block designation to put them side by side, if two containers that are side by side have different heights, then you have to be conscious about how you align them to each other vertically. The default is to align their bottoms. Actually, the default is to align the bottom of each element to the bottom of its parent element. And so that's the default in the vertical align. So in order to get them to align correctly, you either have to change the vertical alignment or you have to make them the same height. One of those things, and then they'll align properly. They'll align properly because they're the same size. Okay. Okay. So we'll do an example of that. So let's start by looking at the week 5 assignment. Very simply, we did the school comparison page. We did a wireframe on that, and we did the raw HTML, and then we did that 2 weeks ago, I think. And so the assignment for this week is to take those two things that we did and to add CSS on top of that. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take your CSS, your HTML file, your school comparison raw HTML file, and you're going to want to add a CSS file to that to style it up to make it look like your wireframe. Okay, so I gave you an example here. This is this would be the minimum required. This is not pretty, right? But this has a minimum. This is the minimum required work in that every element on the page has been touched by some kind of CSS attribute. Okay, that means I've got my logo here. This is the unordered list that I've put horizontally. I've got an image banner here. I've got borders around my panels. I've got borders around my list here. I've changed my ordered list here to be Roman numerals instead of Gregorian numerals. I've put rounded corners here. I put a little gradient background. I've centered my elements. So every element on this page, every single element on the page has to be adjusted somehow from the default style. Okay? So this will probably take you some time, so don't delay. Okay? You should have everything you need to, after we go over to today's assignment, and if you look at the videos that I've posted in this week's module, you should have everything you need to get this done. Okay? In the module for this week, if you look at the week 5, module, we have the CSS lecture slides, which give you most of the attributes that you'll need to use. This is all going to be background images. It's going to be padding and margin and display, all the things that you used in your homework this week, plus things that if you can go to the lecture slides, all of the attributes you're going to need are going to be generally in there. Also, I've linked to these 2 YouTube videos, styling unordered lists with CSS and styling tables with CSS. These are great videos. They're not that long, and they have some great examples of doing style on unordered lists and tables. And so you can use those to watch those and follow along with the work. And then you can use those those concepts in your homework assignment. Okay, so watch those 2 videos. go over the lecture slides, refer back to your homework today, and I think you'll be fine. Okay? All right. Okay, so any questions about week 5? Nope. Okay, so the submission is, I'm pretty sure it's you have to upload 2 files. Yeah, so you need to upload 2 files, school.html and school.css. Okay? All right. If there are no questions, we'll go back to week 4. So week 4, the assignment was to upload these boxes HTML and boxes CSS, and Sonnet HTML and Sonnet CSS. And what you're trying to make was individual pages that look like this. Okay. So if we look at this, what do we see here? What kind of, if we're looking at this design, what kind of containers and elements are we seeing here on the screen? This looks probably a div, right? Each of these boxes is probably a div. Okay. The fact that they're lined up next to each other means you need to have some kind of container around them, right? So you've probably got some kind of row container here, okay, and probably it's another row container here, okay. So you've got to get these 4 boxes, we've got 6 divs. We've got 2 row divs, and inside each of those row divs are 2 divs that we're going to turn into the colored boxes. And up here, this just looks like this could be a div or a paragraph or something. This looks like a div, maybe with a paragraph in it, that's got some kind of background on it and some text. Maybe it's a paragraph, maybe it's a header. Okay. So let's go ahead and try to make this one. I'm going to use Visual Studio. Okay. And here in Visual Studio, I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call it, boxes? I'm going to call it boxes. And inside boxes, I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call it boxes.html, and I'm going to create a second file called boxes.css. Okay. So here in my HTML, I start with my doc type. Okay, just so that we can tell it's HTML5. I'm going to go ahead and put my head. And I'm going to put the body. And of course, I need the whole HTML tag around that. Okay. Here, just for grins, I'm going to put a title. Okay. Here also is where I'm going to put my link to my style sheet. So we can just cut and paste from some other example that we have to get that in there, but we need to link the style sheet together. That also goes in the head. Style sheet is going to be called boxes.css. Okay. So now I'm using a relative path for the href on the style sheet, which means that boxes HTML, when it loads, the browser is going to look for boxes.css in the same path as boxes.html. Okay. So they must be in the same directory. Okay. If I wanted to reference this one.css, I would have to give it some path assistance there to say go up one level in the path and then pull out one.css. Okay. But because they're in the same directory, I'm just going to I can just use that that basic path, relative path. Okay. Okay. So we can save that. We save the boxes. Let's go ahead and get it in the browser. I'm going to close one there. You get in the browser by saying I want to copy the path. I come over here to my browser. I go ahead and paste that in. Okay, and it's blank. Okay. So what I can do now is I'm just going to start putting in my elements in my HTML. Okay. So here's going to be our header. We'll call that heading. We're going to give it a class name of heading. Okay. And inside that, let's just give it an h2 for I like colorful boxes. Okay. And then I'm going to put a div here. We said we think we had 2 rows. So I'm going to give it a div with a row, and then I'm going to give it a div with, and I'm going to say this one is going to be yellow. What orders were they in? Red, yellow, green, blue. Okay, so this one is going to be red. I don't actually need to put a blank line there because there's nothing in these divs. Okay, this one is yellow. I create a second div, also class of row. And inside that, I'm going to do a div. I'm going to say class equals, was it green or was it blue? Green and then blue. Okay. All right, so there are all my elements, right? That should be all I need. Okay, we'll start styling it up and see what it looks like. So now if I come back and reload on my class, we see I've got the header, I've got the words, but it's not. I need to put a background on that. I need to center it on the page, and I'm going to need to put my and the four colorful boxes are on the screen. You just can't see them because there's nothing in them, and so they're empty and they don't show up. Okay. So let's do some CSS. First things first is we want to let's see if we can start. Let's make the boxes visible so that we can see them, so that we can start styling them. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is come here and I'm going to, for my red class, I'm going to say background color equals red. Okay. Now in some of the in a lot of the videos, they're going to be using hex values here. That looks something like, they're going to say, I want to make it black or white, and they're going to put in a value like this. Okay, so that's the hex value for white. Okay, red is just a built-in name. Okay, that we can use. There's a hex value for red. Okay, there's an RGB value for red. So you can. But if you see them on the videos using the hex codes, know that for those 147 built-in colors, you can use the same. You can use the words if you want to. The hex colors give you, I don't know, millions of different versions, 16 million or something like that. I think. You can't tell some of them apart though. Okay, so I'm just going to keep typing in here. This is going to be yellow. The blue class is going to have a background color of blue. And the, what's left, green class is going to have a background color of green. Okay. Right, so now when I load that, what happens? I still can't see them. Why not? Because there's nothing in them, so their size is, they don't have any size. They're 0 pixels by 0 pixels, so you can't see what's in them. Okay. What do you think is how do I make them have a size? I want them to be, 50 or 60 pixels tall and wide. So what's the fastest way to do that? I can use height and width. It's not length and width. It's height and width. Okay, that's one approach. So if I come in here and I say on my red, and I say width, let's just make it 60 pixels. I can say height 60 pixels. Okay, I can save that, and now when I reload it, I can see my box. Okay, because I gave it height and width. Okay, another way to do that instead of using height and width is I can just use padding. So I can say, because remember we said padding is inside the element, right? So padding is between the edges of the element and the content of the element. Okay, whereas margin is between the edges of the outside edge of the element and the elements next to it. Okay, so padding is inside the element. So if I define padding, here I can define padding of 30 pixels. Okay, and that gives me top and bottom padding of 30 pixels and right and left padding of 30 pixels. Okay, so if I just say padding and I give it one value, then it's going to set all 4 paddings as the same value, which should be the same as 60 pixels, right? If I get 30 on the top and 30 on the bottom, 30 on the right and 30 on the left, that should make me a 60 pixel square. Okay, save that and run it. Okay, and I get that. So, which is now, it's actually bigger because in this case, it's taking up the entire width of the container. Okay, so I do get the padding. The height came in right. Okay, but my width is actually my padding on the right and the left, because the default width is going to be 100% of its containing element. Okay, so if we highlight that, okay, we can see that if we look at the row container, we see that the row container is taking up 100% of the screen. See the blue highlights? That means that the width of that container is 100% of the screen. Okay. So padding or width and height. If we're going to use padding, we're going to have to manipulate that outer container a little bit. Okay. So, but I don't want to have to do width and height here, because I want them all to be the same size. Okay. So I don't want to have to repeat this 4 times in each of my yellow, blue, and green containers. Okay. So what I can do is I can use a different selector. I can say for each row, for each div inside each row, and I'm just going to cut this and paste it here. Okay. So this says for each element that has a class of row, and for each child element of that container that is a div type, set the width and height to be 60 pixels. Okay. So let's see if that works. Okay. We come back and notice that I've now targeted, by using that higher level selector, I've now applied those same 2 width and height elements to every element inside each row element. Okay. Let's make them bigger. Let's make them 100 pixels by 100 pixels. Okay. So now they're a little bigger. Let me put that down. Okay. So now let's put them side by side. Okay. Which, the simplest way to do that is we need to change the display. Okay, so the default display is block. I want to use inline block. So I'm just going to cut and paste that on red and yellow. Okay, and we can see that have put them side by side. Okay, but again, I don't want to have to repeat that in every element, because it applies to all of the divs inside the row element, so I can just put it here in my parent selector. Okay, and now everybody's lined up. Okay. Now, how do I put them in the middle of the screen? Is what? Well, I need to adjust the margin, right? So because here, if we inspect these, we'll notice that if we inspect this, we'll notice that the margin of these rows, the row goes across the entire element. Okay, and here we can look to see that in this case, it's 100% of the body in this case. Okay, and my two child elements, the 2 divs inside, are nested inside that row div, but they're all the way to the left, which is the default alignment. Okay, so if I just come in and say, I want to make, for each row, I'm going to make the width of the row smaller. So I'm going to say only make that 50%. Okay, and then make it margin auto. Okay, so now it's going to be centered. Okay, that's not centered though, is it? Okay, so what we see here is that we see now that the row is centered. Okay, because we see the kind of the brownish, orangey color. That's the margin. Okay, and the blue is the interior of the row div. Okay, so we see that the row div, the blue, is 50% of the screen, and it is centered on the screen. Okay. And we see, we can see that the margin, because we said margin auto, the margin is being equally divided between the right and the left. Okay, so our row is centered, but now we want to center the individual divs inside the row. We want to center these colored boxes. So if I come here and if I apply here margin auto here as well, then we see that those should move. Oh, no, that's wrong. It's not margin here. We do text align center. Oh, okay. I'm going to have to edit this out of the video. Let's see, we do, somebody help me out here. Margin auto, height, width, div. All right, I swear I did this before class.
Yeah, I couldn't really get margin auto to work.
It's it works. You just got to get it at the right level. So we can come in here and we can say text line. There it is. Text line center. Yeah. Didn't I try that one? Text line center on the row. Oh, I put it on the. Oh, I put it on the div. Oh, that was the problem. So what I want to do is I want to align all the elements in the row to the center. I'm sorry, I put it here before on the divs. So I had it in the wrong selector. Okay. So here, if I do on the row, I do text align center. That's going to take, by default, it's going to center all the elements within that container. Okay. So now when I reload this, my boxes are centered on the screen. Okay. So now I can I want to put some space between them. So what I want to do here is I want to put some space here on the right and left margin of each of these boxes. Okay. So we can fool around with that. Here we can come in and say, here for green, if I work on the green, and I can say here on each div, if I do margin, and I can do it in, I'll do auto on the top and the bottom, and I'll do 30 pixels on the right and the left. Okay, I'll do 30 pixels all around. Okay, so that's gonna space them out. I'm doing that here in the Chrome Dev Tools, and I'm putting at the class row element div selector. So now if I reload the screen, it's going to be gone. So now I need to put that attribute here. Margin 30 pixels on the top and the bottom, 30 pixels on the right and the left. Okay. I'm using these shorthand notations for the margin. When I say margin auto, like I did up here in line 3, that means I want the margin on all 4 sides to be auto configured. Okay. If I use margin here with 2 elements, then I can say this is the first is going to be the top and the bottom, and then the second attribute is going to be the right and the left. Okay. I can also do, if I do something like this, I can do margin, and I can do 10 pixels on the top, and now I'm just going to go clockwise around the element. 10 pixels on the top, 30 pixels on the right, 20 pixels on the bottom, and 15 pixels on the left. Okay. So if I use 4 elements, it starts at the top and it goes clockwise around the element. Okay. So you have several different shorthand notations there. Alternately, I could say give me margin top of 30 pixels, and I could set them independently like that. Okay. The details and padding works the same way. It has the same syntax as margin. Okay. But we're just going to leave that with 30 pixels on the top and bottom, and 30 pixels on each side. Okay. Okay. So now when we reload, we're here. So now I need to address my header here. So the first thing I want to do on that header is we see it's called heading, and it's got an H2 on the middle. Okay. So the first thing is let's put the background color on that heading. don't know what color that was. I don't know, is it light brown? Let's call it light salmon. How about that? Okay. So now I get the heading there. Okay, but I want it to skinny it down so that in my example it's only taking up maybe 65% of the page. Okay, so I'm going to say margin 65%. Whoops, I'm sorry. I'm going to say width 65%. I'm going to say margin auto so that it automatically centers. Okay, and now we see that it's centered. I want to center my header in the middle. So again, in the header, I can just say text align center. So now it's centered. Now I want to put some space around the letters. So how should I do that? Do you think I want space on the top and the bottom of the letters? I should put padding right inside the div. Okay, because padding is going to be in between the edge of the container, the inside edge of the element, okay, and its content. So the inside edge of the element is right here, is the first pixel of the salmon container, and then so I want padding in between that inside border and the H2. Okay. So here I can just do padding. Let's just do padding on the top. And let's do 40 pixels. Let's do padding on the bottom. 40 pixels. Okay. Another way that I could have done this is I could have said padding, and I could have said 40 on the top and the bottom, and auto on the sides. Okay. But I'll just be explicit like that, and I have that. Now my H2, it's not really as big as I want it to be, so I'm actually going to come back and I'm going to make that into a paragraph instead of an H2. Okay. Save that. Now we see that I lost my H2 default styling. Okay. So now I'm going to increase the font size and the font weight. Okay. So I'm going to do that by saying in the heading, for the paragraph that's inside the heading, make the font size 2 EM. So I want that to be twice the default font size. Okay. And then make the font weight, make it bold. Okay. See, so here, so then we're about done. I don't want to print that. So if I inspect that, I can come in here and I can play with the font size here. So I can say make it 3 or 4. What I'm doing here is I've highlighted, I've gone to the inspector and I've clicked on my paragraph, and I've come over here to my styles panel, and I've double clicked on the 3 EM. And I'm just pressing the up arrow, and it's just adjusting it as it goes. So I can come in here and say, what does 3.5 look like? You know, so I can adjust that. If I want my heading, maybe I want that to be, I'm just going to click on the width, and I'm going to use the down arrow key to make that a little smaller and say 55 looks better, right? So let's say that instead of 65, let's make that 55. Let's make my boxes, let's make those 50 pixels each. Whoops, that was the wrong one. Let's make those 150 pixels each, make them a little bigger. That's good. Let's put a little rounded corners on each of these. So rounded corner on my colored boxes, and let's go ahead and put a rounded corner on my heading as well. Okay. See, so now I've got a little bit of a round corner there because I've got a radius. That's a 10 pixel radius, so it's just rounding off the edges as we go. So that should do it, huh? If I wanted to make these circles, then all I would have to do is just go ahead and increase the radius a little bit. So I can just go into the red. I'm clicking on the red element here, so that and now I can get the styles over here, and I can see my border radius. is 10 pixels. If I'm just highlighted that, and I'm pressing the up arrow key. So I can just say, go ahead and make that all the way around. So if I give it at some point, the radius doesn't matter anymore. So if I have a 100 pixel radius, it's going to look like a circle. Okay? Or if I leave it back at, now I'm just pressing the down arrow key. I can leave it at 35 pixels. Okay? All right, any questions on that? Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. All of the attributes that we used are defined in the slide deck. So if you go back to that slide deck, all of the attributes that you'll need to do your styling for most of the attributes you'll need to do your styling are in that slide deck, and then the rest are going to be in the other the two videos that I put in the module. Okay. All right. So here, my box is HTML and box is CSS. I'm going to put that in the shared Google Drive folder, where in the same folder where the lecture slides are. Okay. So if you want to look at that, you can pick it out from there. You may use mine as a guide. You may not copy mine. Okay. So if you are using mine as a guide, you need to name your elements something else. So instead of row and red, yellow, and green, change the names of your classes. Do something so that I know that you've done more than just type verbatim what I've done. Okay. Okay. Any questions? Nope. Okay. Let's do the sonnet. So for the sonnet, I'm going to go ahead here, come back to my folder. I'm going to create another folder. Inside the folder, I'm going to add a new file called sonnet.html and another one called sonnet.css. Okay. Those are saved. Here in my HTML, I'm going to do my doc type. Oh, that's the wrong file. Sonnet.html. I'm going to do my doc type. I'm going to do my HTML container. I'm going to put my head. I'm going to put a body. Okay. Space those out a little bit. Come back in here. I'm going to put the title. This is going to be sonnet example. And then I need my link, which I'm just going to go copy again, so I can never remember how to type it. So there's my link, but I need to change the name here to be sonnet.css. Okay? All right, so there's my basic structure. Okay? There's nothing in my CSS. Okay? Let's look at the example. This is what we're trying to say. So here, what do you think we have? Looks like we've got a div here, right? That goes around. So this dark blue is a div, and it's got some kind of label or a paragraph here in the bottom that's aligned to the right. Then this looks like a div here on the side that's got this index in it, right? And this looks like a div here on the right that has the contents of the sonnet in it. Okay, and they're the same height. They have different background colors, but they're the same height in that they're lining up at the bottom, and they're both taking up some, looks like maybe 80% of the parent container. That looks like about 80, 90%, maybe 70% somewhere from here to here. So that's some 70, 80% of this outer div. Okay, so the height of this container is probably 80% of that div. Okay, and then we've got this paragraph or this label underneath it. Okay, so first things first, let's get this blue box. Let's get this blue box in, and then let's put the blue background, and then let's put the index and the sonnet in there and get those lined up right. Okay, so that's 3 divs, 2 nested inside one. Okay, so here in my HTML, I'm going to say div, and I'm going to give this a class of wrapper. Okay, and inside that I'm going to give this a class of index, and I'm going to put another one in there at the same level class of sonnet. Okay. Inside my class, looks like we've got a header of some kind. I'm just going to call that, let's just call that an H2, and then I've got an unordered list here. Okay. So let's do an H2 and sonnet index. Is that what it says? Yeah, sonnet index. And then I've got an unordered list, and I've got list items that are links. And the link is going to somewhere. Okay. And it's sonnet number 1. Okay. There are links there, right, to, if we go to sonnet 18, we can see that, I'll just Google for sonnet 18. We can get this. There's probably a Wikipedia page or something with all that on there. Here's this Poetry Foundation. Let's see, sonnet 1. Here's sonnet 1. So we can use this as the link. Okay. So I'm just going to copy this URL from my address bar here. I'm going to make that the link. Okay. And I'm just going to copy that. Actually, I can do another one here. And I can do an A. Here, if I do an href here, if I put in just the hashtag sign or the pound sign, whoops, what did I do? I deleted my. I've got a red here. I've got an extra angle bracket. Okay. So here, if I put in a link here, and this will be linked to sonnet 2. Here for my href, if I just put in href equals hashtag or pound sign, that basically is just going to link back to itself. That's just a link to the same page. Okay. You can use that as a placeholder while you're working on this until you get the links. For the sake of time, I'm just going to leave them there. But normally you would have to come back in and find the links and then fill those in. Okay. So that should be our index. Let's go ahead and get this in the browser so we can start seeing what it looks like. So I'm going to copy the path, go back to my browser. Okay. And there's my sonnet index. Okay. Now let's get the sonnet contents itself. Okay. And it's supposed to look like this. It's got Shakespeare Sonnet 18 at the top. Okay. And then it has this little paragraph here, and then it's got the sonnet. Okay. So here inside here, I'm going to have another header. Shakespeare's, did I spell that right? Sonnet number 18. And I just happen to have here are the each line in the sonnet, so I can just cut and paste this. I don't have to type them all over again. Okay. When I get to that point, so we have the title, and then I have a paragraph. And the paragraph here, you would need really to copy this. For the sake of time, I'm just going to use some lorem text there. We talked about lorem last time. The lorem text is just nonsensical text. It looks like Latin, but it's not. It's just made up words that have sentence structure and paragraph size that look like English. Okay, so even it's just really placeholder text, but it looks and is formatted similarly, so it looks like an English sentence. Okay, so we'll have that paragraph there. Then here I'm going to have another paragraph where I'm going to put the lines of the sonnet, okay, which I'm just going to cut and paste from here. So I'm just going to highlight that and copy and then paste it in, okay. And I've got some formatting to do here. Okay. So now if I save that and we look at it in the browser, if we reload it, what do we notice here? One, that the blocks are top and bottom, right? So my divs are blocked top and bottom. So I'm going to have to switch those to be inline block, okay, so that they're side by side. My paragraph looks pretty good, but what do I notice about my lines in my sonnet here?
It's not formatted right.
It's not formatted right because you want them all to be on new lines, right? So there's a couple of ways I could do that. I could put each one of those in a separate paragraph if I wanted to. A simple way is to just put a line break after each one.
Actually, that's what I did on mine. I just did line breaks after each line.
Yeah, and that works. Okay. So now if we render that again, I'm now lined up right. Okay. So now I've got most of the content there. Now I just need to put them side by side and get some backgrounds. Okay. So now we go to CSS. So let's put the background on the index. So on my index class, I want to give it a background color of what color is that? Do you think? Oh, here's the example. That's maybe like a light blue. This is like a slate blue, and that's like maybe a dark slate or something like that. So let's call this light blue. Okay. And on the sonnet, let's give that a light background color of light slate gray. Okay. Notice I'm using VS Code here, so I'm getting a little bit of IntelliSense, some syntax help as I type. Okay. As I type here, as I begin to type in my element, I type back, and it's showing me all of the CSS attributes that are matching what I'm typing. Then I can use my arrow keys here up and down to just pick the one I want, press the enter key, and now it's giving me here are the values that you can use. I could type anything I want here, or I could just pick from the list. See, and it starts to subset the list as I type. Okay, let's save that and look at our example. Okay, so those are not exactly the colors; they're close though, right? So now I've got the backgrounds on them. Let's go ahead and put a background on the wrapper. Back to Visual Studio, or I'm sorry, to VS Code. So here we have the wrapper, which is around the index and the sonnet, and in our example, that's like this dark. Let's call that dark slate gray. Okay. So here in CSS, I can say wrapper, background color, dark slate gray. Okay. Maybe it's dark slate blue. And that's light slate blue. Maybe that's why I got it wrong. Did I get that? Light slate. Oh, there is no light slate blue. Okay. Let's look and see what that is. So here, that's coming out. That looks more purple than blue, but we're going to live with it. Okay. So we notice this is the background. Okay. Now, this is the wrapper div. We're going to want that to be around the right and the left and at the bottom. Okay. So now we just need to take our index div and our sonnet div, and we need to change their display values to be inline, to be inline block, and then we're going to want to adjust their width so that they are taking up the right size. Okay. So what we can do a little experiment here in the browser. So if we come in here and we say on my index class, if I just say display inline block, okay, notice that already we've gotten rid of the width. It's only taking up the width of its elements, okay, but it's still not side by side on the other one. So here on the sonnet, I could do display inline block. Oops, I misspelled display. Okay. I put that on the wrong one, didn't I? I did. So but we know we need to put that on the wrapper. So here we can say, for the wrappers, for each div inside the wrapper, I want to do a display inline block. Okay. And then for the index, let's make this width. Let's make that 35%, and for the sonnet, let's make that 50%. Okay. All right. So now they're side by side. Okay. They need to be the same height because in our example, they're the same height. Okay. So we can set those to be a height relative to its parent container. Okay. And I've got my widths the widths are not there yet. This one is too wide, and this one's probably okay. This one is too wide. Okay. So we're going to have to narrow that down. We could say, let me go ahead and inspect that. I can inspect the index. And here we can see that I had the width at 35%, so I can just narrow that down to, that looks like 20. That's probably better. And then here on the sonnet, I can take the width and maybe I want to narrow that down to maybe something like that. 35. Okay. So we'll do the index at 20 and the sonnet at 35. Look at that, it's already changed it because I was modifying it in the dev tools for Chrome. Okay. So I've got my index at 20%, my sonnet there. Here on my wrapper, I want to center those, so I'm going to do text align center, which will put them in the middle. So now they're in the middle. In my example here, my wrapper container wasn't 100% of the screen, so I want some white space on either side. So let's make that wrapper a little less. Maybe make that wrapper 80% and center it. Okay. So here in my wrapper, I'm going to do width 80% and margin auto. Okay. So now that's centered. Okay. That's looking reasonable. Maybe less. Let's make it like 60%. Refresh it. Notice what happens when I make that 60%. Notice my inside containers are getting smaller as well, because these are percentages. This is now 35% of 60% of the screen, right? So while it was 35% of its parent container, which when that was 100% of the screen width, that was 35% of the screen width. But now it's 35% of its parent container, and its parent container is 60%. So now I'm making it smaller as I go. So I'm going to want to maybe go back and adjust those. Let me make the sonnet. Let's go back to 65% there, and let's do 40% here. Okay. But now they're too big, because that's more than 100. So let's make this 30, make that 55. That's 85%. Okay. So that's pretty good. Okay. Now let's make them the same height. I can do that by let's just make them height percent as a percentage of their of the parent. Height HIGHT. Let's make it 80% of its parent. On the sonnet, do the same thing. Okay. Oh, that didn't work. And so here I can do. Did I do it in the wrong place? I can do vertical align here. I can say vertical line at the top. Okay, so now it's at the top, but my height is still not right. Height. Oh, I don't want to do percentage there. For the height, I want to just do. Let's see how I'm going to inspect the sonnet div over here, and when I hover over here on in the elements tab, I'm hovering over the class sonnet, and we see that it's showing right here. It'll show up, and it says that my container is 469 by 477. So in that case, it's saying it's 469 pixels wide and 477 pixels tall. okay, in this particular view, okay, that will vary based on, that might vary based on how wide your screen is, okay? But in this case, it's 477. So here I can just use a fixed height. Let's make it 500 pixels. And see what that does. Okay, so now they're the same height. Okay. So now in our example, we've got this little, we've got some of the div showing at the bottom, some of the wrapper at the bottom, and we've got this label in there. Okay. So let's go ahead and put that in. So that's going to be another div. So I'm going to highlight here. I highlight the beginning of my sonnet, and it's going to highlight the opposing closing tag here. So then I'm going to add another. I'm just going to add another div there, and in there I'm going to put a paragraph, and this is going to be okay. So when we load that, you can see that my container is there, and this should be right aligned text. So we can kind of fool around with that in the elements to see how I want to right align that. That's this div down here. So here I could just try on my div. I can just say text align, and let's just make it right. Does that work? No. No, we want it on the paragraph. So on the paragraph, we want the width of the paragraph to be 100%. Yep, see, I should have done this before I came to class. Text line right. We want, I'm at the wrong level here. Oh, it's because I've got an inline. Okay. What's happening here is because this div is inside the wrapper, it's got an inline block because it's inheriting the inline block from these two divs. So on that one, what I want to do is as well as lining it right, I want to get rid of the inline block, I think. I want to say display as a block. There we go. Okay. All right. Did everybody follow that? That was kind of a weird problem. So what's happening here is because in my sonnet, in my HTML, okay, I have three. I'm going to collapse these down so I can use these little arrows to collapse my internal divs. I've got three internal divs here. Okay. I've got index, sonnet, and then I'm going to have my class here. I'm going to call this footer. Okay, so this is the index, the unordered list. This is the contents of the sonnet. This is the footer, that little paragraph at the bottom that's supposed to be right aligned. Okay, so but here in my wrapper, I said for every div inside the wrapper class, make it inline block, which means that it's not going to be 100% of its container. Okay, so what was happening was that paragraph, that footer div that I put in, was aligning so that it would be next to something by it. So I want to override that. So here what I can say is for my footer, I'm going to put the display back to block, and then we're going to do text align right. Okay, let's go ahead and put some padding in there of 20 pixels. Okay, so now if we look at that in Chrome, padding, and then we can update my paragraph. So let's say for inside the footer, for the paragraph, make the font weight of bold. And let's go ahead and make it slightly bigger. Font size of 1.3 EM. Okay? But it's still not aligning. So this is a quirk of the browser. So what's happening here is if we look at the footer, we can see here that, see it's got display block, but see how it's struck through? And that's because the selector of wrapper and div, this selector is overriding this one, okay? Because this selector, wrapper and div, for the wrapper container with all the div elements inside of it, and this selector footer, all of this applies to the footer, okay, as well. So it's overriding. So it's overriding my instruction here, okay. I can fix that in a couple of ways, okay. First thing I could do is I could say make it important, okay. So now it's going to override, okay. That's kind of a sledgehammer approach. If I use the bang important notation, bang being the exclamation point, and the word important coming after that, that's just going to, that says this is the most important attribute, and it overrides everything else. Okay. The problem with that is that you get a lot of bang importance around, and then it gets all messy and ugly, right? So I could, instead of doing that, what I could do is instead of doing wrapper div here, because I've only got one element in there, I could do index, comma, sonnet. Okay. And so now I'm only putting the display inline on these two divs, and my div at the bottom is going to stick with its default of block. Okay. So I can fix that problem by making my selectors a little more granular. Okay. Here, this UL, there's a lot of space in between these elements. So we could probably make that smaller if we could probably adjust the width of that. We can see that it's got 100% width of its container. So if we come in and I say make this 40%, looks like 30% looks about right, and I can say margin auto and center that. Okay. So that makes that look a little better. So now I can just come in and add that in my index. See how I'm doing the testing in my browser to kind of fool around with it and do a little debug. And then when I get what I want, I can come back here and I can say for index, for the UL element inside the index, set the width to be 30% and the margin to auto. So here I haven't saved the CSS yet, so we see that it's back to its normal default styling. So when I save the CSS, we see that it comes back and now it's centered. Okay. All right. So that would get me there. Now, if I were you, I would probably spend a little more time and actually make sure I get these links. See if I click this link, I'm gonna go out to the Sonnet 1. I didn't put links here. So if I click here, I just have the pound sign or the hashtag as my href, which is just linking to itself. So it's not really going anywhere. So I would spend some time here to put in actual links there. Maybe I would put some padding here around this paragraph, because this paragraph in our example, there was a little, it looked like a little padding in there, right, around that paragraph. So maybe here I could make this paragraph. I can either put padding inside that paragraph, or I could just make it less width. So if we can spec that, and we can kind of fool around with it and see. So here I could say, let's see, this padding. If I do padding on the auto on the top and the bottom, and 20 pixels on the left and the right, no, it doesn't like that. Okay, so I could do. See if we did width. I just made the width 90%. And then do margin auto. Center that. That looks a little better. That gives me a little space on either side. So I can experiment with that. And that was the Sonnet get my selector right. So there I'm going to give this another class. Simply because in this case I can't target both the sonnet all paragraphs because I have two. I only want that style to apply to the first paragraph. So I have to give it a class name or make it more easily selectable. So here I can do selector for sonnet, and then for what did I call it? Intro. I can call that width of 90%, margin auto. Save that, and then we run here and it's good. Okay, so this would, this gets you the bulk of the assignment. I mean, I might try to maybe fool around, maybe try to, there's maybe this contrast between this black and this kind of grayish, bluish on the back is not awesome. I might fool around with the colors, maybe try to get better mix of colors here. Obviously, I would go in here and I would fix the contents of this link to be whatever it was on the example. I think it was it had another link in it to a Wikipedia article. Notice the size of this text is different. So the size here is bigger than this one. And in my example, I have them the same size. So maybe I need to go back and modify that. Maybe one of those is let's see. So for the index, I used an H2. So let's see, for the index, let's use an H3, and for the sonnet, I'll use an H1. And we can come back, that's not right either. But so maybe I'm going to fool around there with getting those spaces right. So at this point, before I turn to my assignment, I'm going to do some more micro, some cleanup work and just kind of pay attention to the details. CSS is all about the details. Okay, it's always very detail oriented. Okay, and often you'll spend what seems like a ridiculous amount of time getting one little element to move a little bit to the right, and sometimes you just can't get that selector at the right level. That just comes with practice and is doing it over and over and over again. Yes, sir.
Can you please again show the div with your cursor here? How many divs we have?
So there's a wrapper div. So this kind of bluish purplish box on the outside, that's one div. That's called wrapper. That has a class of wrapper. Okay. This blue box here on the left, that's one div.
Okay, but where does it close this one?
So this wrapper is it's immediately in the body. This index div is nested inside the wrapper div. Okay, and then this sonnet div is also nested inside the wrapper div. Okay, and then I have this is a div here at the bottom for this footer, and that is also nested in the wrapper div. So there's the body out here. There's the wrapper div, which is an immediate child to the body, and then there are three divs nested in the wrapper, all as the first level child. Okay, they're not nested in each other. They're all nested directly in the wrapper div. So if we look at the HTML, you can see I've got the wrapper, and see it's immediately inside the body, and then I have index, which is the first child of wrapper. I've got sonnet, which is the second child of wrapper, but it's nested inside wrapper. It's not nested inside index. So these are siblings. Okay. Sonnet and index are siblings to each other, and they're both children to wrapper. Okay, wrapper is the parent to index and sonnet. Okay, and then I've got a third one down here called footer, which is also sibling to index and sonnet. Okay,
4 main divs.
I've got 4 main divs. I think I only have 4 divs. I think I did everything else with paragraphs. Yeah, I have 4 divs. 3 of the inner divs nested inside a wrapper.
5 divs, it didn't work for me. So
you can use this as an example if you wanted to compare. I could have I used a div here for wrapper. I could have just this wrapper, because it's the only element that's child to the body. That's the first level child to the body. I could have just styled the body. I didn't have to necessarily style the wrapper here.
Did you want your divs like in relation to where the wrapper?
I could have, but I could have substituted the body there, and I could have just made my body 65%
Oh, okay.
and gotten rid of this wrapper tag, and then it would have worked just the same. At this point, because the div element, this wrapper, is the only element that's at the first level in the body, they're basically identical at that point. I could style either the wrapper or the body, and I would get the same effect.
In most case scenarios, it would make something though.
You know, generally like that, I mean, you're not really styling the body there. I mean, the body is applying to the entire page, right? So, and it's rare that you're only going to have that one element there. But here, if I did wrapper, let's see what happens if we, instead of wrapper, if we just change that to body. So that's the only wrapper I had. So now, I don't know what that's going to do. But here, instead of using the class of wrapper, I'm just using the element of body. Okay. Let's see what it looks like. Okay. So now I got my background right, but my width is not where I wanted it to be. Okay. So we'll put that back. But you kind of see that because they're basically that wrapper is the only element in the body, so you start getting a lot of, they start working together. They become rather indistinguishable at times. Okay.
Mr. Needy,
Yes, sir.
I googled for the width and for the height. For the width is 1024 pixels,
Mm-hmm.
but for each monitor is different from the other one, right?
Yes, every monitor is different. So here, if I start to adjust my size here, notice what's happening. So because I'm using percentages, see it's all getting smaller here. So that's why you have to be a little careful with percentages there.
I
And
didn't
so
go with percentage. It didn't work.
right, so if we do percentages here, we see that at this point, and we can show that because I have the dev tools open, as I'm increasing the size of my screen, you see up in the top right corner how it's giving me the pixels. So now I'm at 1298, 1297, 1295,
Where does it show?
up at the top right corner of the window. See when I'm moving there, so you can get that. One thing I can do is I can use a min width. So here, if I say at this point, let's see, at this point here. So this is about as small as I ever want this panel to be. So I can inspect this panel, and I can see that it is. Let me make this bigger. So I can inspect the Sonnet panel, and I can see that it is currently 500. It's 500 pixels wide. Okay, so it's 420 pixels tall by 500 pixels wide. Okay, no, it's the other way around. 420 wide by 500 pixels tall. Okay, so I can come in here on my Sonnet and say I want a width of 55%, but I want a min width of 420 pixels, and save that. And now, as I make this bigger, it will get bigger. It's getting wider as my screen gets wider. But at some point, see here, it's not getting smaller anymore because I've reached that minimum width, and now it's sticking at 420 pixels. It's either going to be 55% of its parent container or 420 pixels, whichever is bigger. Okay, which also means at some point it starts to flow down here. So, you know, this screen is not very responsive. So if I was looking at this on a mobile device, it wouldn't look very good. We only have a few minutes left, but another feature of DevTools is that you can use this link here down in the bottom left. And so you can toggle the device toolbar where you can say, I want to show me this in a 1200 by 677 pixel screen. Show me this at 1100. What does it look like? So I can adjust my screen size. I can also say, show me what it would look like if it was on an iPhone 10. Show me what it would look like if it was on a Pixel 2. So you get some screen sizes here that you can fool around with. So if you're working on what's my page going to look like on multiple size windows, then you can you can use this as a testing tool to do that. This is called responsive design, and it uses a lot more CSS to set the dimensions and characteristics of each of the containers based on the screen size. So in this case, you would want to test using a media query. You might want to say, if my screen is at least 700 pixels wide, then I want to style it this way. If my screen is only is less than 500 pixels wide, I want to style it this way. So there's a series of breakpoints there that are used for the common screen sizes. So big monitors, laptop screens, iPads and tablets, and mobile devices. So for each four of those sizes tend to have a different media query.
So like an average aspect ratio that people keep in mind when they're doing autocorrect.
Yeah, and so while the different mobile devices are different sizes, I mean an iPhone 10 and an iPhone 7S maybe are going to have slightly different screen size. Most of them are close enough that if you target one, you'll get So you tend to focus on kind of four main blocks generally. Usually, what happens is you'll adopt a framework like a Bootstrap or a Vue.js or one of those frameworks that has all that styling built in for you. So you don't have to do that over. You only have to style your custom elements. You get kind of a default responsive styling on them. But it's good to know how that works, because before the frameworks were available, you had to do it yourself. So, okay. So then you can turn off that device emulator. Go back to your example. All right, so that's it for today. I will put I'll put both of these examples boxes in Sonnet in the Google Drive for the class. So if you want to look at them, you can. You may not copy them. You may use them as a guide. Okay, so if you want to follow my example, you can, but you need to type it yourself, and you need to change the names of all of the elements in the classes in some way so that I know that that you understood what you were doing. And if I just happen to use the same classes and you've already done this, then you can claim innocence in the comment when you upload the file. Okay. So anyway, so that's all we have for today. So again, you cannot copy my work. You can use it, and it's important here to type this yourself, because you're building muscle memory in your fingers of how to type this, of how to keep your tags formatted correctly. Typing the attribute names and the contents just folds that memory, and the more you type it, the more you're going to learn it. Okay. All right, that's all for today. Any questions?
So we don't get penalty?
Oh, there's a penalty, yeah, but you it's 20% deduction if it's late. So that's the class standard. But in this case, if you have struggled with that, then you can use this as a guide, and you can submit your late work.
Where is this posted?
It'll be posted in the Google Drive folder where the lecture slides are. So if you go to the Canvas site in the modules, there's this Course Tools module, and here there's a Google Drive folder. And here is where I keep all of the the lecture slides and everything else. So I'll just upload it here. So I'm going to upload that right now as soon as I'm done with this lecture. Okay. All right. Thank you for coming. You have an assignment due Sunday, and we'll see you next week.